started while folks are finding their seats. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. Despite the terrible gloomy weather we're having today, it's great to see all of you with us here. My name is Amali and I'm the events director here at Books Are Magic. So we are so excited to have Rafael Frumkin and Thankam Mathews with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Rafael's newest novel, Confidence. But before we get into all of that, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. So first off, we do ask that you keep your mask on at all times while at this event. We will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of tonight's discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After tonight's talk, Rafael will be signing and personalizing books at the table next to where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And lastly, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of Confidence online using the link in the live stream description. All right, let's get into this. So in Confidence, we meet Ezra Green and Orson Ortman, roommates and grifters at heart, who take off on a series of cons and scams to support themselves, culminating in the creation of a billion-dollar company called New Life. One can only imagine the chaos that is bound to follow. This novel is a propulsive page-turner, and we cannot wait to hear what more Rafael has to say about it tonight. Rafael Frumkin is a graduate of the Iowa Writers' Workshop and the Medill School of Journalism. His first novel, The Come Down, was published in 2018 to critical acclaim, and his collection, Bugsy and Other Stories, is forthcoming. He lives with his partner, 2 cats, and 1 dog in Carbondale, Illinois, where he is an assistant professor of creative writing at Southern Illinois University. As I mentioned earlier, Thankam Mathews joins Rafael in conversation tonight. Sarah's work has been published in Best American Short Stories, and she's a recipient of fellowships from the Asian American Writers' Workshop and the Iowa Writers' Workshop. All This Could Be Different, her debut novel, was shortlisted for the National Book Award. All right, that's all from me. Without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Rafael and Sarah.
Hey y'all, it's such a pleasure to be here with you, and it is a genuine delight for me to be here in conversation with the great Rafael Frumkin. Rafael's gonna start us off with a reading from his book.
Thank you so much. I'm similarly honored to be here with you. And I'm so excited to see everyone here. It's a book tour, right? Like, it's always sort of hit or miss whether people are going to show up. And this is like a pretty full audience, so I'm very appreciative and very excited to see you all. I am going to read, well, let me give you a little context first and foremost. So like Alani said, this book is about 2 grifters, Ezra Green and Orson Ortman, who meet in a juvenile detention camp kind of situation called Last Chance Camp, not so fondly called Last Chance Camp. And they kind of do these sort of small scams and small schemes, these kind of like Mickey Mouse grifts, and they work their way up to New Life, this giant billion-dollar company. But before they get there, they invent this thing called synthesis, which is a kind of hypnotic mind control. If you've ever seen The Vow, the NXIVM documentary, what Keith Raniere and Nancy Salzman did to people and get rid of their limiting beliefs, stuff like that. That process, which I forget actually what it's called, that mind control process, is similar to what's happening in the excerpt I'm going to read to you right now. So right now they're at this kind of Trump Tower sort of situation, and they're scamming this really rich older woman by performing synthesis on her. I'm going to read it from you. Okay. Can you hear me if I just talk like this? Cool. Alrighty. There was a buffet of fruit and croissants on several trundle carts in the back of the conference room at the Boyd, presided over by Pilar and Tori from housekeeping, both of whom hated me and Orson because we disrupted their nightly routine for what Carol was calling Orson's Secret to Happiness seminar. Pilar and Tori had also been tasked with bringing several ice-filled steel tubs loaded with beer, hard lemonade, and purified water down from the executive lounge. These tubs were to serve as the open bar, though the women Carol had rounded up for the seminar were all similar to her, early to late middle age, trim, impeccably made up, and would likely not have wanted to waste their calorie count for the day on a can of hard lemonade. Pilar and Tori had to dig into the ice for bottles of Fiji water and hand them out with no hope of receiving tips. When I turned to them with an apologetic look, Tori ignored me and Pilar glared. Orson was wearing a bespoke suit Carol had bought him for the occasion. You have to look your best, dear, to get something tailored, and I'll pay for it. And he and I had come up with a set of talking points. His God-fearing father, his saintly mother, his hard-scrabble childhood in the fields of Nebraska, his brother's cerebral palsy, his passion for economics and law, his love for the free market economy, his mentorship of me, a former teenage delinquent. He was going to focus on the secret to happiness as he understood it, which was to work hard and pray hard, and then offer a few tenets to live by. 1. Love the one you're with. 2. Don't stray from God's path. And 3. Keep your eyes on the prize. He'd rehearsed the speech for me, and even though I could detect an undercurrent of nervousness, it had been suitably hypnotic. It was difficult to look away from him when he spoke, and it was even more difficult not to believe what he was saying. I felt like I was listening to a real young Republican. I sat in the front row, between Carol and Julia Warwick, the wife of a jowly philanthropist whose anti-Semitism was an open secret. Your friend is the genuine article, Carol said to me, and then smiled pleasantly at Julia Warwick. You won't regret coming to hear him speak, she said. If he sounds anything like he looks, I won't regret anything, Julia Warwick purred, and Carol laughed, so I did too. Orson was standing behind a podium at the front of the room, shuffling a stack of index cards on which I'd scrupulously written nearly every word he planned to say. I winked at him. He smiled tentatively and winked back. Then he turned to survey the room. He was thinking about them now, not about me. Ladies, Orson said, and the murmuring in the room dropped a note before stopping altogether. Thank you for coming today, and a special thank you to Carol Argyros for organizing this event. My pleasure, Carol called, and swiveled to beam at the other woman in the room. The genuine article, she crowed. Thank you, Carol. Orson knit his brows, thinking. I've had a difficult life, ladies, which makes me all the luckier for being able to stand in front of you today. You could say I've lived many lives. I've been a son, a brother, a student, a mentor. Here he gestured to me, and I bowed my head reverentially. By the grace of God, I've had the privilege of being able to lift people out of difficult circumstances and set them on the right path. I've loved and I've lost, and I've done it all in the span of a couple decades. My friend Ezra, you could argue he's had it much more difficult than I have. I nodded. I could feel every set of eyes in the room on me. Ezra, tell me, what was the most difficult moment in your life? I sold heroin to a boy younger than me, I said, and he later nearly overdosed. Gasps. Ezra, what held you back? You did, Orson, and God. He had found me in a homeless shelter when he'd first moved to the city from Nebraska, he said, and I'd reminded him of his brother with cerebral palsy, so he decided to mentor me. He'd helped me off drugs, and we'd gone to college, and then we'd come back to take jobs at the Boyd. I worked hard, ladies, and I prayed hard, and Ezra and I made it out of danger's way. A round of applause, the first of many. I saw Orson's smile brighten, his shoulders untense. He spoke for nearly an hour, and I watched the women all around me pull their handkerchiefs from their Louis Vuitton purses and dab at the corner of their eyes, or knit their hands into impassioned fists in their laps. Then I watched Orson, his eyes bright and his limbs fluid, pacing back and forth at the front of the conference room, captivating even Pilar and Tori, who had cracked open bottles of Fiji water for themselves. It seemed as if he were the only source of light in the room, as if we'd all been left in darkness were he to stop speaking. Ladies, he said, I've been working on a way to share my happiness with you. I know we're just in a conference room in a hotel, but I think this can still be a very spiritual place. He was going off book. I tried to make eye contact with him, but he was turned away from me. Can I have a volunteer? He asked, pulling an empty chair from the front row. The room exploded with chatter, the women looking among themselves for someone willing to volunteer. Carol moved to the edge of her seat. I could tell that she, like me, had not been expecting this. When no one emerged after 30 seconds, she stood up. I'd be happy to volunteer, Orson, she said, to good-humored applause from her friends. Just promise not to send me into some kind of state. Laughter. Orson joined in. He gave her his hand as though he were helping her out of a horse-drawn carriage, and she joined him at the front of the room. You all know and love Carol, don't you? A chorus of yeses. And you know that Carol, despite seeming superhuman with all the loving and caring she does for us and Dimitri, is only human. Another chorus. Carol sat down. Orson stood behind her. I'm going to place my fingers at your temple, Carol. At your temples, Carol. And I want you to just focus on my fingers. Nothing else. The room was completely silent. I wondered, half in panic and half in curiosity, what the fuck he was doing. Carol, this is a process called synthesis. It's meant to cleanse you of all the things in your body and mind that trouble you. I will take these things out and put them between my hands through the power of prayer. I watched as Carol submitted herself completely to him, leaning her head back, closing her eyes. Orson closed his. The plan the entire time had been to make them feel titillated, playing on their attraction to Orson without pointing it out directly. But this was something else entirely. Something they hadn't discussed before. Okay, Carol, I want you to exhale slowly. You're going to feel a little pressure in your head. Your frontal cortex is going to light up with spiritual energy. God is capable of stimulating the brain in this way. Carol exhaled slowly. Say something you're afraid of, Carol. I'm afraid that Dimitri will get bored of me. I'm afraid that he's already gotten bored of me. It was a stunning admission, especially in front of all her rich friends with all their socialite niceties. She was breathing deeply, Orson breathing in unison with her. Say something else, he said. His voice's cadence similar to hers. Say something that scares you. I'm afraid that Dimitri is having an affair with one of the help. Then I saw Orson increase the pressure at the sides of Carol's head, and she appeared to jump as though a bolt of electricity were traveling the length of her body. The woman gasped again. Carol, Orson said. Tears had formed at the corners of Carol's eyes. Listen to me, Orson said softly. Carol nodded. Do you feel the pressure leaving your brain? Do you feel your fears leaving your amygdala and your reason returning? Do you feel God in your body? Carol nodded again. Tears trailed down her cheeks. Relax your shoulders, Carol. There's a darkness in you that I'm extracting. You're having fears that you don't need to have. I can feel it, Carol mewed. My God, I can feel it. Bliss is knocking on the door of your mind, Carol. Open the door. Let it in. Orson opened his eyes. What are you scared of now? Nothing. Open your eyes. Carol opened her eyes and leaned forward and gasped and sighed, and the air in the room became dense with applause. Synthesis brings your body and mind together, Orson said over the applause, his hand between Carol's shoulders. The darkness leaves your body. It restores you to sanity. I wanted to be mad. He'd done something totally unprecedented, something we hadn't discussed. But my own vision was thick with tears. How did he always get away with these incredible things? How did he fool even me? What was that? I asked him on the train on the way home. He was inspecting the check Carol had given him for $3,000. He shrugged and smiled at me. Something I thought up at the last minute. I didn't know what to say. I looked out the train's window at the city lights blinking past us, and then looked back at him. It was amazing. It's hypnosis. I watched some YouTube videos about it, the power of suggestion. But it could become something bigger. The lights appeared to be blinking faster. It could be like the thing you're known for. It could, he said dreamily, and leaned back against the window. I leaned with him, feeling the night's chill at the back of my head. I love you, I said under my breath. What was that? That was incredible, I said louder. That was really incredible.
For those of you who haven't read Confidence yet, you're in for a treat. It is rare for me to be entertained and delighted and intellectually stimulated by a contemporary novel. Rafael is like low-key a genius at writing just incredible scenes, and just generally balance. I hope this is okay for me to say, because I believe that a big part of the work of a novel is to generate pleasure. And this is such a pleasurable novel. It is so entertaining, alongside being beautifully crafted and so smart. And the reason why I'm starting out by before asking Rafael any questions, I'm starting out by gassing this book is, one, because it deserves it, and two, because I want you all to remember that every work of contemporary literary fiction that comes out is a fragile thing. So books move by word of mouth. They move by you talking about the books you love, posting about them on social media. These are things I hope you do for confidence. Okay, tell us, what was the first seed of this book? Like, where did it start for you? And like, and I'm interested in the sort of like starting of aboutness, but also like where, when, and how, and the characters came to you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So this was a pandemic book. Was yours was too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we both have pandemic books. So like I mentioned, Nexium, the documentary The Vow, was a huge influence. I had just finished watching the first season with my good friend who was sheltering in place with me.
Okay.
And we took a walk, as we were all doing at that point in time, because there was nothing else to do,
Life
right?
was lousy with walks.
It was
That's all I
lousy,
remember.
exactly. And we were talking about what we'd just seen. And if you're familiar with this documentary, Keith Raniere, sort of the guy at the center of the Nexium cult, this really repugnant, awful person, who, suckered these people into not just giving him a bunch of money, but to giving him sex, to giving their lives over to him. I was thinking about this guy and I was like, wow, like what an atrocious person. And I was wondering, because he's older, right? He's a boomer, and I was wondering, like, who are the atrocious millennials? Who are the scammer millennials? And we were kind of generating some names, thinking about like Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, thinking about Anna Delvey. Exactly. Iconic. Yes. Thinking about Billy McFarlane and the Fire Festival, Ari Newman and WeWork. And an idea was kind of germinating for me. I was like, wouldn't it be great to have a narrative about, a young scammer, right? And no one's so disgusting as Raniere, right? But someone who's more of like a P.T. Barnum kind of figure, someone who's just sort of gins people up about like, a cause or an idea, and gets them, the very rich at the very least, to give them money. Mm-hmm. And my friend actually, I posed this to her and I was like, what do you think? And she was like, well, I think, the next big, like the millennial scam is going to be Bitcoin. And I was like, but that's so boring, I wanted someone who could like kind of create a cult almost. Mm-hmm. So I thought first and foremost of Orson, who is the magnetic personality, as you saw in the selection I read, kind of at the center of New Life. And then I thought of a kind of Nick Carraway figure for him. So that became Ezra. And he's the foil, and he's also trapped in this kind of limerence with Orson. And then, yeah, it just started from there.
I love that. What surprised you when you were writing a novel? Because I really have this theory that like you can think you're going in with a vision and a plan and outline, all these other things, and a novel, if it's successful, which this one is, will always surprise you because they're so capacious and our like dumb little brains can't hold on to them.
Oh gosh, yeah, what surprised me? It's an excellent question. And I think I was surprised, I guess I was surprised by, this sounds silly, but I was surprised by how many people fell for it, which is absurd because I'm the one who's engineering the entire thing, right? But I was surprised. I guess I'll say I was surprised at how convincing Orson's argument became on paper. Because there's a point at which Orson starts to buy his own bullshit, starts to believe in himself and what he's saying, and really thinks he's actually helping people. And I was thinking like, oh, this is all smoke and mirrors, right? This is like so easy to see through, and the reader will see through it. And maybe I'm, patting myself on the back here, but like, I was like, wow, like, it's kind of surprising how easy it would be to fall for one of these things. You know, you see people getting sucked up into cults and into these scams, and you're like, that would never happen to me. But actually writing something like this, I was like, oh, I could see how that might happen to me.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And it's like, so, I mean, like one of the things that makes it a stressful ass experience to read this book is because it is so plausible. It is like, you can see the auditorium rooms like unfurl in front of you and the like acolytes to, you know, Orson's bullshit. But there's a reason there have been many successful cults, you know, and snake oil salesmen and what have you. One thing I loved about this novel was just the simple fact of Orson and Ezra. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like, move over, you know, Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani. There's a new, like, hot scammer couple in town, and it's these two. And I'm curious about what drove your, like, I mean, you've talked a little bit about the idea of, like, I mean, you've talked about, right now, about Orson coming to you first, and this idea of, I'm extrapolating, so tell me if I'm off base with this, but like, to me, wanting a Nick Carraway, right, is like wanting a narrator figure who can like patiently, carefully observe the charismatic main character while being a little bit in love and while like revealing himself. And other than that, were there any other reasons why you wanted to make this novel that is already kind of, you know, it's a crime novel, it's a cult novel, it's a little bit of social satire, like it bends genres in all these other ways. Why also make it a love story?
I think because so I mentioned, right, that it is a love story, and it's also a story of limerence, right? It's also a story of like obsession, infatuation, you know, wanting something so badly and having that thing be just out of reach. And I think that works for me in a story that's so much about late stage capitalism and scamming, just because there is so much that we want, you know, in our culture, in our economy, practically speaking, that's just out of reach, right? Like, as millennials, and you say this in your novel too so beautifully, you know, we graduated into that kind of complete like economic wasteland, right?
Fuckery.
Yeah, exactly.
Fuckery not of our making.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was 2008, right?
Yeah.
And we were promised, you know, that we could have, right, like these stable jobs and these middle class lives, you know. But what do we have instead? The gig economy, you know, and kind of scraping by, right? So that obsession, right, and that want and that kind of like, you know, vulnerable, naked, almost embarrassing need that Ezra has for Orson feels like the need we kind of all have for stability and for, you know, something that loves us back, something that keeps us safe.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense, and that's beautiful. One of the things that I found myself being like very compelled by as I was reading, even though it's not, you know, really like it's featured front and center in like reviews or in blurbs, necessarily in the sort of summary of the novel, is throughout the novel, and this is not like a huge spoiler, but I'll tread lightly, but throughout the novel, Ezra, our narrator, starts to notice like the progression of like just like vision issues, and the way the actual experience of realizing that there's something that's like progressively going awry in the body, something that has the potential to be disabling in this way. You know, I think it's somewhere in the first 20 pages that Ezra refers to himself as like all but legally blind. It's written about in this like really moving, really careful, really precise way. And I'm curious about why that mattered for you to include. You know, like what does Ezra's grappling with his vision mean to you?
Yeah, I kind of wanted it to work on a few different levels. First and foremost, the book kind of endeavors to have this 3-act tragic kind of Sophoclean structure, you know, and characters with fatal flaws, right? When you think of a tragic narrative, you think of like Oedipus Rex sleeping with his mother and killing his father, and then he plucks his eyes out as a result, right? And so that kind of that cluelessness, that blindness, that moral blindness, right, is
and blindness is like, I mean, it's many things, and also like not a metaphor, right? But it's
right.
also like, it also is. It's very goth, and as you said, like, yeah, ancient tragedy like
Yeah.
thrives on it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's I love that. Like it's very goth. Yeah, yeah, that's such a good way to put it. But yeah, it's right. So it has that tragic element to it, and then it's also like once again in is this so often the case with Ezra? It's about vulnerability. You know what I mean? It's because he's often looking down, right? Because he's so embarrassed by how strong his glasses are, except he's a smooth talker at the same time. So like he's kind of operating on these different levels where he's ashamed, he's embarrassed, he's a tragic figure, but at the same time he'll con you out of all your money. And so his blindness, maybe it is a kind of moral blindness, maybe it is a kind of fatal flaw, right? Or like a reification, a fatal flaw. But it's also just a sign of his own vulnerability and his feelings of smallness and his feelings and his insecurities, like any one of us could have with any sort of like a disability or whatever have you, right? Things that are kind of marginalize us, for whatever reason.
I'm tough to hear you say that because so in a couple of the reviews that Confidence has gotten, all of which have been raves that I've seen, but a few reviewers, I guess, like did like sort of like had a line in there about the vision issues and we're like, oh, like this is meant to symbolize like the moral blindness, and I was like, oh, like that's interesting. It's not that I think that that's wrong, but that's not the meaning I made of it.
Right.
I felt so I felt so brought into this character in a deep and thoughtful way. I was like, oh, this is vulnerability, this is masculinity, the denial. Yeah. Okay, not to go on and on about this. Clearly something that I thought a lot about. And there are many beautiful passages. So one of many pleasures of this book. Okay, so this is a big and sort of like swooshy question. Feel free to take it in whichever direction you want to. But like, you have clearly thought about the fact that we live in a golden age of grifters, right? And like, I'm curious, this sort of like briefly skates a little bit away from your novel, but I'm curious about why you think that might be. What is it about this moment that makes, or this moment in America, in our larger culture, what have you, that make the Anna Delveys and the Elizabeth Holmes and the Keith Raniere's, I don't know how to say his last name, like come out of the woodwork?
Yeah. Oh, that's an excellent question. And I think anti-capitalism, like critiques of capitalism have become such a part of the zeitgeist, at least a part of the millennial zeitgeist, right? I mean, you can go on Twitter and people are just sort of like, capitalism sucks, which is true. And
it's true, but it's not necessarily advancing something.
Exactly, right. It's sort of like beating the drum that's being beaten relentlessly day after day, and it's to my mind, right, like this increasing awareness, or this dawning awareness, right, of the fact that we are living in a flawed and broken system. Engenders a kind of fascination with people who are trying to game that system. You know what I mean? People who are trying to kind of find ways to manipulate others and to manipulate, the resources they have, what little resources they have. In the case of Anna Delvey, right? To get ahead,
Right.
And it interests us so much because there is this kind of boom and bust quality to it. You have the scam, like with Theranos, you have Elizabeth Holmes is on the rise, right? She's making billions of dollars, and then when she's exposed, she plummets. Once again, there's that tragic arc, of the plucking out of the eyes kind of thing. And I think we're so interested in that because we are all hustling, right? We are all striving. And we are trapped in this hustle culture, right? We're trapped in this gig culture. And seeing people who are, as repugnant and awful as they may be, seeing people who are trying to find a way out, in, of course, awful ways, right, is fascinating. It's interesting, to see people gaming the system.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What were the books or other texts that crossed your desk when you were writing Confidence? Like, what felt like influences, possibility models of what you didn't want to do, what have you?
Yeah. It's probably pretty obvious that Bad Blood crossed my desk, like, in a big way. Yeah, everything about Theranos crossed my desk. The Talented Mr. Ripley and Highsmith in general.
Yes.
Yeah, with Tom Ripley's kind of psychosexual obsession with Dickie Greenleaf. That was definitely a model. Without the violence, of course, without the murder, right? That was definitely a model for the Ezra and Orson situation. This isn't a book, but I was definitely, if you heard the theme music playing, I was very influenced by Succession. Watched a lot of Succession, and just sort of kind of fell in love with the whole white collar crime kind of situation. And it's once again the kind of tragic elements of that, and I would also say, and this sounds pretentious, but and like kind of troublingly broad, but Greek tragedy in general, just kind of like those ancient tropes that we become accustomed to, like as writers, and we see repeated in fiction. That stuff has always captivated me.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I thought of like 3 different questions and they all got like stuck in the doorway of my brain. But yeah, I mean, I think that I am curious, and particularly because you are a multimodal writer, right? Like you've written for TV, you've like written like novels are the center of your writing practice, but you also have exposures to sort of other other modes. I'm curious about what, like, let me think about how to say this right. Like, I think everyone is more or less in agreement that we live in, like the golden age of scammery and grifteration, right? And like a lot of how many of us hear about like particularly egregious stories of scammery and grifteration is like new documentary drops on Hulu, or like Vulture has this like crazy story about like a Russian socialite who like scammed her way like to the highest echelons of New York society and then into Rikers. And given that there's like all this already like heavily fictionalized, or like heavily narrativized, I should say, like these texts out in other forms of media, what are things that you think fiction in particular, like fiction and novels, can do particularly well when engaging with questions like why is this the moment of cults and scams, and like, I mean, literally, like as we speak right now, like we're dealing with like after effects of like a literal bank run, a thing that I did not think was possible anymore in this day and age, like in Silicon Valley, right? So I'm just curious about what you think fiction can do, and if there's anything that differentiates it from like a Fire Festival documentary type text.
Right. Another amazing question. Yeah. I think that, well, like what fiction does, in addition to like telling us about the human condition and the contents of our heads and our hearts, I think is it provides a kind of capsule. It provides a kind of like narrative capsule, that we can, or I guess this is like a belabored metaphor, but that we can kind of like use to kind of contain all these really troubling ideas, right? So if we can put, like this scary stuff, right? Like WeWork, like the Make Run you mentioned, and we can kind of encapsulate it in a single, simple narrative, Fiction gives us that opportunity to kind of distill things, better understand them, have maybe fewer variables, A book, obviously, right, a book can have a ton of like plates spinning in the air, but when we point a kind of like narrative laser focus on something, I think that like that really helps our understanding of the thing. You know what I mean? And it helps us grow as thinkers, helps us grow as readers, you know. It does the stuff fiction just always does, you know. So it's a fantastic question, right? Because this is this is like a very confusing moment. Like it's kind of like it's awful and very scary, and we're all very scared, and it's all very bad. But it's also, you know what I mean. But it's also like kind of interesting and exciting, you know, for maybe for this accelerationists among us. You know, but I mean, right, that aside, like there is like cool stuff happening, there is interesting stuff happening, there are human events that are worthy of exploration. And I think fiction's like the most ideal mode through which to do that. So yeah, no, thank you for that question, that was fantastic.
Oh yeah. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, a couple more questions, and then we're going to open it up. So start thinking about what you know you want to ask Mr. Frumkin. And yeah, I'm curious in a sort of big picture way, who your influences have felt like, not just with like this novel, but like with writing in general. I mean, I sense Sophocles and the ancient Greeks, sure, but like I'm also interested like broadly in your like sort of project of writing fiction. Who the leading lights are or were.
Definitely. I'm a huge fan of James Hannaham.
Okay.
God Says No and Delicious Foods. Actually, Delicious Foods is just on sale over there. Which I like. God Says No is such a voicey book. It's such a fascinating book. Has anyone ever read God Says No? Yeah. Jesse has. Okay, very cool. Yeah, God Says No is the story of a queer black man living in southern Florida who is sent to conversion therapy by his parents. And he's also like obsessed with Disney World. Like there's a lot of stuff going on for him. And it's the story of his sort of escape from this facility and like how he comes to terms with himself. And it's written in this like really intense, like fascinating first. And Jennifer Egan is like friends with James Hannaham. This is like such insider baseball, but like she kind of helped him submit this manuscript around. And some of the feedback that the two of them got, like I guess one editor was like, we can't publish this guy's manuscript. This is like a really like rough memoir. Like, you know what I mean? Like this memoir isn't working. And they're like, this is not a memoir. This is just, yeah.
I mean, I don't know why I'm acting surprised, but I'm like, well, that's absurd.
Isn't that absurd?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was just because the first was that good. Do you know what I mean? It's just because it was like the verisimilitude was that amazing. And obviously, right, there was also like abundant racism happening there too as well. But Hanaham's ability to write that really like close textured first is like something I really admire. I'm also a huge fan of C.E. Morgan's Sport of Kings.
Oh, I don't think I know their work.
Yeah.
Okay.
C.E. Morgan, she's great. Sport of Kings is kind of like Jamie Gordon's Lord of Misrule. I actually like weirdly like a lot of horse racing books. It's a book that's about like horse breeding and horse racing, but it's also very much about like, you know, the violence of racism, right, in the American South, and the kind of like what has been done to the country and to the world by global white supremacy and slavery. And it's kind of this like fantastic unpacking of that through the lens of this white family that breeds these horses, who employs a young black man to like, you know, work in the stables for them. And it's just a stunning book. Those two books are hugely important for me. I'm a big fan of Visit from the Goon Squad too. Speaking of Jennifer Egan,
Love that book.
love that book, and it was really influenced my very first novel because of the polyphony, you know, and the way they're all the chapters are woven together.
Yes. And for any of you who read Confidence and are like, damn, like love this, where can I get me more of this? Strongly recommend The Come Down, Rafael's first novel. Which is getting made into a TV show, movie?
A TV series, yeah.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
Hell yes. Do you have a sense of when it might be out in the world, or is it one of those things where it's impossible
Barbara,
to say?
do we know? I don't know. We don't know, but like yeah, it's impossible to say. It's one of those things where we're kind of, it's like in development, and we're figuring out like, are people going to give it the thumbs up? The higher ups going to give it the thumbs up. So we're working on, I'm not, I refer to it as we, as if like I'm actually writing anything, but I'm not writing on this project. the writer and director and producer are working on a pilot and a few other episodes.
Cool.
So we'll see what happens when they get those together.
And those people are.
Those people are the writer is Gretchen Enders, who wrote for WandaVision. The director is Regina King, and I'm so excited about that.
Love me some Regina King.
Yes, me too.
Dude, that's so cool. I'm like fucking pumped.
Thank you. And then Freddie Highmore is the Good Doctor is the producer. So.
Wow. Incredible. Okay, one more question for me, and then I'll open it up. And honestly, I have more questions, but I wish to be a little generous to our audience. What is your hope for this book and or this next chapter in your writing life?
You know, my hope is actually my hope is kind of funny when we're talking about TV. My hope is to sort of move into like increasingly like accessible spaces. Like The Come Down was very much like, oh, like this is like very serious inaccessible literary fiction, and Confidence endeavors to be like more of a romp, you know what I mean, more of like a caper and kind of silly. And I want to like move, like I want to be doing some stuff for TV as well. Like I feel excited by that, and I want to kind of work in like this interesting register, like as if I'm like on this level, but like I so admire Colson Whitehead, you know, I so admire Karen Russell, and I just admire how these people take genre tropes and like genre ideas and like infuse them with like a literary, like what does that mean, right? You know, genre. I'm a kind of a genre abolitionist here. I don't really believe in like these distinctions, but infuse them with a quote unquote literary sensibility. You know what I mean? So it's like like sci-fi, but it's also like, you know, about like this very, you know, these like complex themes. You know, not that sci-fi isn't already incredibly complex, but I want to go in that kind of genre direction and bring like my own sensibility to it.
Love that so much. All right. If you have a question, I would love if you put your hand up, and I may, depending on how much you project or not, I may repeat it, because we have folks watching from home. Yes?
You talked about some of the things you were watching and reading for the book, but I was just curious about any other research that you felt you had to do. This seems fairly intricate, so I was just wondering what was involved.
Oh, great question. Yeah, this is funny. I actually somehow am friends with someone in finance. I don't know how our friendship works, but it does.
Very capitalist.
Right? Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. Crossing over the dark side. He manages to also to be like a really sweet guy. I don't know. It's very weird, but he and I had a long conversation about like special purpose vehicles. And you know, and you know, Callie knows. Special purpose vehicles, right? And like what happens when you default on a $3 billion loan, you know, and like how, I mean, he knows full well how one could embezzle money in a white collar situation, how one could inflate a stock price, right? Or share price. And so we talked quite at length about like how all of that would work. And I had several conversations with people who also weren't coming from the dark side, but were more in these kind of like activist positions about how that would work. I researched, there's this really great, and I'm forgetting the name of it now, but there's this documentary about Herbalife and this like quote unquote activist investor who was trying his best to bring Herbalife down just through throwing hedge fund money around. So he shorted I can't talk right now. He shorted Herbalife to the tune of maybe like $1 billion or $2 billion, and in the hopes that Herbalife would collapse. And Carl Rothenberg in the book is modeled after this guy. And it was just so fascinating to see like how this all went down. And you know, like watching that documentary, watching the Enron Smartest Guys in the Room documentary over and over. I've been watching that since that came out. I just, again, go back to the Greek tragedy thing. So yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really curious. I mean, there's one quality, obviously, but, you know, all these people in culture now, you know, Billy McFarland, Caroline Calloway, Anna least, for my limited knowledge. So I guess I'm wondering, like, what are the qualities that are sort of standard in this archetype, and what makes these people, different?
Oh yeah. I mean, this is like not the world's most original answer, but I would say they all share very intense narcissism. These are sort of like really malignant narcissists, and it's not that they have like self love so much, because that's way more benign and that's actually a constructive feature of one's psyche. But they have this kind of like overinflated self regard, that they have this feeling that the rules don't apply to them. I think we are interested in them because we know the rules are bullshit, but acting in that way when kind of confronted with those rules is like outrageous. That's like not the way to act. You want to dismantle those things instead of like gaming them so that you just get rich and everyone else is fucked over. So I would say what unites them is the narcissism and this kind, and actually like a really like kind of incredible intelligence. Keith Raniere, the way he manipulated people, oh my god, like the guy had planned everything to a T. It was shocking. But and the question too was like what distinguishes them?
Yeah, and also like, you designed this character here, so it's like at what liberty were you able to say like, okay, I'm designing someone that feels true to this archetype and could come from this place?
Right. Yeah, I think that, so definitely, it was definitely Orson's narcissism, his narcissism, his self-regard that brings him together with those others. But I think what distinguishes him is that there's a softness to him, and there's a vulnerability he's unwilling to admit of. Like Carolyn Calloway. I think Anna Delvey. There's something to Anna Delvey. I think there's something going on there. But Elizabeth, I don't know. If we could rank them on who's like the most sympathetic. But like Elizabeth Holmes, who appears to be having children, so she doesn't have to go to prison. It's wild. Like maybe she's not quite as vulnerable as some of these other people, but I think Orson is vulnerable or wants to allow himself to be vulnerable but can't. He does love Ezra, he does have feelings for Ezra, but he won't let himself share those feelings with Ezra. So I think that's what distinguishes him, and that withholding as well, the sensitivity that comes with that withholding. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Other questions?
If you, so I know that ideally, everyone in the world reads this book, but if you could pick like 3 archetypes of like person to read this book, who would it be? The MLM gurus. Is it like
Right.
graduate from high school? Like, who would you think would be like would gain the most? I think from reading this book?
Oh, absolutely.
Let me very quickly repeat the question for the live stream, which is what 3 archetypes of people would Rafael like to read his book?
Yeah. Oh, such a good question. I wish if Bernie Madoff were still alive, I think he'd have a really fun time with this book. I think like 3 archetypes of people. I think it would be good. Like I talked a lot about the kind of like millennial striver, and someone who is sort of like, working for Grubhub and like holding down 3 other jobs, is getting paid barely anything. I would give this book to them. I wouldn't like make them buy it. And I think this book would be like an affirming read for them, right? Just because it would maybe demonstrate to that person how fundamentally fucked the system is, and how their frustrations are merited, right? And how and hopefully would give them like a little bit of levity, maybe, you know what I mean? Like this kind of like this broke millennial, I would want that person to feel affirmed. I know that person's probably being confronted daily with affirmations of their frustration. You know what I mean? So this book might not do a whole lot to advance that cause, but it would at least like be something, you know, maybe like lighter or funnier that could also like point them in that direction. Um, I think I would also like, you know, my friend in finance, like if his friend group read this book, and I think he's gonna make them read this book. And like it's so funny. He like loves all of this. Like, you know, that would be a great group to read it too. Like maybe like younger people who are kind of in that world who are realizing like, oh, holy fuck, like what am I doing? You know, what am I like? What is happening here? And because there's like to me there's kind of like the millennial upper middle class is all like in tech and finance, you know, that's where the money is. And those people should read this book, right? And just like the striver, those people should read this book and they won't feel affirmed. Maybe they should like check themselves a little bit. Maybe they should like see like, hey, maybe I should give some of my money to the striver. Maybe I should give some of my money to people who are marginalized in other ways, who deserve my money, you know, more than I do because I have so much, you know. And I know people in tech, and maybe not necessarily finance, but I know people in tech who give their money away. Who are like the character in your book. That, oh my god, I love him so much. Remind me of his name?
Amit. Yeah.
Yes.
Who's like a Silicon Valley bro who like is like I make too much money. My other people can have it. Specifically, his best friend from middle school who is using a lot of drugs and like really struggling back in Milwaukee just like starts sending her money.
Yeah, and he's like this like I think in my review I called him this like fierce proponent of mutual aid. I like love that. You know what I mean? Like I love him. Like so like someone like that, maybe that this book could like bring someone like that, you know, to the fore and be like, hey, like maybe I should start doing this. Like plant that seed in their mind. And the third archetype, gosh, I can't think of a third archetype other than Bernie Madoff. But thank you for the question.
Yes, one more question. It's you.
Yeah. Great.
In your other writing, your short stories, your journalism, you've written about so many different topics, far too many for me to list here. But in both your novels, you seem to be sort of exploring the hollowness of capitalism and the American dream. Is there something about that particular subject that is somehow central to something you want to explore? Did it just work out that way?
Oh
On
yeah.
this subject?
Yeah, I think so I was someone who did grow up with some privilege. I grew up middle class. And you know, and like I'm aware of that and I want to like give back as a result of that. But I think that as I was growing up, like as I was kind of like coming of age and like when we were in college together especially, I was like, man, you know, well, college was fun, but like I was also kind of like realizing that like there's a lot of like hollowness happening, like in my, you know, not in my friend sphere, but like it's sort of like in my, in the kind of like appurtenances that I was surrounded with, you know. So like I'm in this kind of suburban landscape that's like a total cultural wasteland, you know, growing up. I'm, you know, going to like this nice school, but like the people at the school are all like really cruel to me, you know, and kind of realizing that like this you know economic caste system, this class system that we all have to live with is like such absolute bullshit, you know. The stratification of wealth, like the way that people treat each other based on how much money they have, I just find outrageous, and I would love for this all to be abolished and just to not be happening. And so I think it was like through kind of confronting my own privilege, and realizing like, hey, you know, I do have it good. Like I'm growing up middle class, but like at whose expense am I growing up middle class? You know, there are other people who are like suffering in order for me to like have this middle class comfort. And so I really wanted to. I don't know if this is like counts as paying it forward. Like paying it forward is like giving my money away, which I try to do as much as I can. Not to pat myself on the back, I should do it more. But like, I think also like writing, having this as a theme is another way to kind of like pay it forward, quote unquote, insofar as fiction can move any kind of a needle, insofar as like my little book can move any kind of a needle in the big world, which like probably it can't. But like, you know, I want to tackle these themes just because like I want to kind of unpack and explicate the things that have like, you know, defined my life in like these kind of troubling ways. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out, and thank you to Books Are Magic for hosting us, and thank
Thank
you
you
to
so
Rafael for sticking out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for braving the storm and coming out tonight. Thank you, Rafael, for celebrating the font for us, and
Thank
Sarah
you.
for moderating such a wonderful discussion. So, as I mentioned earlier, Rafael will be signing and personalizing books in this back little window. My coworker Jules is pointing to where that is. So, if you've gotten your book and you would like to get it signed, you can go ahead and start forming a line there. If you would like to purchase a book, we have additional copies up at the register, as well as copies of Sarah's book, All This Could Be Different. Both are fantastic reads.
Please
so
buy
I
All This Could Be
highly
Different
recommend.
immediately. Oh my god.
Yeah, both are fantastic. Read them back to back if you want a very emotionally wrecking week, I would say. And lastly, if you're still with us on the YouTube live stream, you can buy those books by clicking the link in the live stream description. All right, that's all. Let's give these two one last round of applause.